everyone, my name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today we are going to be exploring yet another new term in the world of BDSM, which would be pleasure dom. Now, as you may know, I have recently been exploring different apps for dating that are meant for kinky and or polyamorous people. And in my time on those apps, I have come across so many new words like gentle dom and soft dom, which I have actually covered previously. And one of the other words that I started to see more and more was pleasure dom. And so what I'm going to be doing here today is trying to break down exactly what pleasure dom means and how it's different or not so different from other types of dominance, where it comes from, all of that good stuff. So if you have also been seeing this term floating around and aren't really sure exactly what it means, we're going to try and answer that here today. So first of all, I do want to note that as someone that has been active in the BDSM lifestyle for over half a decade at this point, I have never heard the term pleasure dom in real life. I don't think I've ever had any conversations about it, any discussions around it. It does appear to be a newer term, and based on my research as well as word of mouth, it appears to have come from TikTok about in the last year or so. And I can also tell from Google Trends that this wasn't really something that people were searching for until about 2020. And the few blog articles and Twitter threads and Reddit threads that I was able to find about pleasure doms only date back to around the past 6 or 7 months or so. So this does appear to be something that was very much influenced or created by the circumstances of the pandemic. But I think that actually makes some sense, right? Because as you are having to stay at home and you're not able to go to work, that leads to time of self-reflection and trying out new hobbies. And for some people, that means getting really into baking sourdough or trying out crossword puzzles. And for other people, that means exploring their potential kink identity. And alongside that exploration, some people found a new word to describe what it was they were exploring and experiencing and starting to enjoy. But what exactly does it mean to be a pleasure dom? If you're not on TikTok, the information about this is few and far between, so I'm going to do my best to stitch together what I think is a fairly solid definition. And what pleasure doming appears to be is it is a type of doming where the partner gets their enjoyment from pleasing their usually submissive partners sexually using a combination of about 4 different core techniques. That would include sensation play, edging, orgasm control, and orgasm torture. Now, that's a lot of different words, so I'm going to slow it down here for a second and define what each one of those things are. So number 1, what is sensation play? Sensation play is a general category of BDSM activities where one uses sensations in order to produce a usually pleasurable but sometimes unpleasant result. This can include things like temperature play, which would be like hot wax or ice cubes. It can include things like Wartenberg wheels, feather dusters, boas, rabbit fur, anything really that plays on the sensations, especially of touch, but generally of the body. This is oftentimes paired with things like restraint or sensory deprivation, such as through cuffs and blindfolds to enhance the experience. Edging, also called tease and denial, is a sexual form of BDSM play where someone is brought just to the edge of orgasm, then the stimulation is removed such that the person is unable to come. From there, this can take on 2 different forms. One, the edging can happen continually over an extended period of time until the person is finally allowed to orgasm, which enhances the sensation, or the person is edged and then not allowed to come. Then we have orgasm control, which can take on one of 2 different forms. One would be orgasm control, where it means that in a consensual DS BDSM relationship, the D type has control over when the S type is allowed to orgasm, usually through a requirement that the submissive asks for permission prior to masturbating or being allowed to come. It can also be a form of behavior modification where the D type is able to control when the S type comes, typically through a verbal command. Now, the process of how to develop being able to make someone come on command with just a word, it's a very involved process and not something I'm going to be able to explore in detail in this video, but just know it's a thing. Now, finally, we have orgasm torture, which is another form of sexual BDSM play, usually done on people that have vaginas, where they are brought to orgasm over and over and over and over again to the point that the sensation moves from being pleasurable into being uncomfortable, even painful, and creating a sense of fatigue. This can invoke a very intense sense of surrender because the person feels like they can no longer handle or have control over what is happening to them even as the sensation continues. Now, I would say of these four, the two that are the most common would be orgasm, torture, and edging, but usually scenes that involve pleasure doming can have a combination of all four of these and can even have other elements of BDSM involved as well. So, for example, a pleasure doming scene might look like the dominant partner setting up the room in a very luxurious fashion and having rose petals and candles before putting a blindfold on their submissive partner, tying them down to the bed, and then plugging in the Hitachi and going at it until they trip the circuit breaker. They might also do a little bit of sex-centric sensation play, like ice cubes on nipples or teasing with a feather duster, but the focus is on the orgasm and enhancing the orgasm. And usually what is going on is contributing to that or is enhancing the sexual experience in some way. Now, all of that seems simple enough, but like any other piece of newer terminology like gentle dom or alpha sub, I have some questions, like, is this really dominance with a capital D? And to answer that question, I have to say my honest first impression is no, based on how I define what dominance means. I wasn't really able to find any sources or blogs or anything that talked about this having a side to it that involves contracts or rules or structure or some kind of other relationship form to it besides just make orgasm happen, which is fine, by the way. I think sexual BDSM is completely valid. I think having BDSM that is centered around orgasm is also totally valid, but I don't think only having things happen during a scene is necessarily what DS is entirely about. I think based on my observations of how people describe this, it seems to be closer to being a top than being a dom, because being a dom means you have some kind of power exchange happening. If you are merely performing the actions of a scene, that is what being a top is. But I can understand how that label might get applied, because a lot of people have the misconception that everyone that is on the power receiving or the action performing side of a BDSM relationship is a dominant or a master. And people kind of apply that term, that label, to anyone that's doing that without really thinking about the level of things that they're engaging in while doing BDSM. It's a really common misconception. And of course, when you have a term that is being created in an internet vacuum without necessarily the influence of the real life community and how we use terminology, these things are going to happen, and there are going to be disagreements about where the separation is between top and dom, because it is a subjective spectrum. And what one person calls being a master, someone else thinks is being a dom. What one person thinks is topping is somebody else's dominance. It's all very subjective. And I don't want to discount the fact that there could be people that include this kind of play as part of a larger dynamic. I think things like orgasm control totally make sense in a DS relationship, and things like edging can certainly be used as a punishment for if somebody breaks the rules. So I'm not saying it doesn't happen, I'm just saying I haven't really seen that be part of the conversation and haven't necessarily seen a lot of evidence for it. Now, the second question, of course, is why exactly did this become a thing? Why did this develop its own label? Because if you are like me and you are part of the real life community, you might look at this and go, isn't this just like orgasm focused service topping? And for me, I sort of see this as perhaps a specialized subset of service topping that is focused on things like orgasm control and torture and edging and so on. But of course, service topping could literally be anything. It could be needles, it could be blood play, it could be age play. Like literally anything can be done from the angle of service topping if you want it to, but usually those terms don't get their own new capital letter label, right? We don't yet, anyways, have people going around saying, I'm a medical dom, I am a flogger dom. I mean, that could happen at some point in the future, but usually when people are topping and doming, they have a variety of things that they do. Now, I would say in the real life community, people do get reputations for doing certain things. Like, oh yeah, that's the fire play guy. That's the wet and messy top. Like, people do have things they get a reputation for, but that tends to be a label or a descriptor that the community puts on someone because of that and what they're seen doing versus a preemptive label that would be used on something like a dating profile. I would say the one exception to this would possibly be rigor, which is a specialized word that is used to mean somebody that primarily engages in rope bondage as part of their BDSM experience. Now, for me, I do think I see the term pleasure dom as useful, even though I maybe disagree on the top dom distinction there. I think this is great because for me, when I see this on an app or on FetLife or what have you, I basically know right away this person and I are not going to be compatible because my BDSM is primarily non-sexual. I don't want to do orgasm torture. I don't want to use a Hitachi. Like, those aren't really part of my kink experience. And because I have this as sort of a signal to say, hey, I know we're not necessarily going to get along with our kink interests, that also means the opposite has to be true. And that other people are going to see this or hear about this and go, oh my gosh, that is exactly what I'm looking for. And I think that is what BDSM labels are meant for. They are supposed to be used for signaling to others sort of ahead of time what it is you might be into as a way to determine if you might be compatible or what your interests are. But I do still have my reservations about this. I was talking with some other sex educators on Twitter, and we all seem to have sort of a similar opinion about this, which is that it's really great. There are more new terms that people can use to help them explore and discover their kink identity. But at the same time, we're all a bit cautious about siloing very hyper-specific forms of BDSM play into their own labels because that can inhibit exploration into other areas of BDSM and limit people in general on their kink journey. And also, of course, it reinforces stereotypes because you guys didn't think I was gonna go this whole video without mentioning stereotypes, did you? Because, oh boy, there are a lot of stereotypes about BDSM out there, especially in the conversation around the term pleasure dom. And one of the perfect examples of this comes from one of the most popular blogs outside of TikTok that first started to discuss this term. Quote, "One of the biggest reasons it took me so long to get into BDSM, even though I have a very strong submissive side, is because it looked really uncomfortable. I'm not turned on by being bent and bound in positions that leave me aching. I'm turned off by pain of any kind, and fingers shoved down my throat were an absolute no for me." And that's the kind of thing I saw whenever I looked into BDSM. Women in contorted positions, slaps across the face, aggressive face fucking. I know that people engaged in it loved getting that kind of treatment, but I knew it wouldn't be for me. There was also this top comment from Reddit which said, "Pleasure dom is absolutely a thing. It's how I am. It's domination by control and not by violence." And it's really interesting to think about where these people are maybe getting their impressions of BDSM from, because it does seem to me, based on the quotes I was able to find and just read, that a lot of people are getting their idea of what BDSM looks like from things like rough and kinky porn, which isn't really so much about doing BDSM in the way that people do it in real life in relationships, but more about like yelling at someone to suck your cock and then slapping them in the face and spitting on their forehead. Like, that is some part of BDSM. Some people do those things, but it's not by any means representative of the default BDSM experience. And the more I look into this newer terminology, the more and more I see stories from people that seem to have very deep-seated misconceptions about what BDSM even is, and that makes me really sad. Like what are we doing wrong? What can we do better? How is it that people over and over and over and over again seem to have these just like very narrow ideas of what kink can even be? And I want people to know how wonderful and wide and amazing the world of BDSM is. It's not just that sadists are these really cold, uncaring people that don't give a shit about their partners, and that doms are by default these domineering, controlling assholes, such that we need special words to differentiate from the people that explicitly don't do those things. It can be about pain, it can be about degradation, but that's certainly not all of it. And I will say this as well, there does seem to be this very vanilla understanding of what pleasure is baked into the term pleasure dom. And this might be nitpicking, but I think it's worth sort of exploring in your brain and seeing how you feel about it. But pleasure and orgasm are not necessarily exclusive, right? In the world of BDSM, most people are doing BDSM activities because they enjoy them. That enjoyment can be kind of counterintuitive. It's not always sunshine and rainbows and this feels really good directly. It can be sort of an indirect form of pleasure. But at the end of the day, people are doing BDSM because they like it. And there's a way of enjoyment, there's a way of doing things that involves pleasure that isn't necessarily only linked to orgasm. And I wouldn't say that other people that are doing BDSM that don't involve sex aren't doing it in a pleasurable way. I think some of the most pleasurable scenes I've ever done, my genitals are like not part of the equation even remotely, right? Really intense, romantic, sensual floggings and getting punched in the legs and in the butt and getting slapped across the face and, having a cigar ash, put out on my hand. Like, those are all really pleasurable experiences for me that are also very deep and emotional in a way that I don't think can really compare to having an orgasm. But of course, I'm an ace person, so when it comes to anything involving sex and orgasms, just be aware of that. My perspective is certainly skewed because of that. And also, most ethical doms do not do their domination through violence. If we take violence to merely mean pain, most people that are on the submissive side have some degree of masochism to them, or are brats, for example, and so things like direct corporal punishment don't actually really have the intended effect. I don't think control is the sole domain of pleasure doming. Most people that engage in DS relationships have control at the forefront, and they're much more likely to get better results through things like having somebody do extra dishes or extra chores versus beating them senseless just because they can. And not to mention, there's already so many different kinds of dominance out there, from being a service dom, caregivers, daddy doms, brat tamers, pet owners, all different types of labels that don't have to just be about humiliation and sadomasochism. And even when those elements are present, they are, and they should be, based on a mutually enjoyable experience. And then there's one big sticking point about this term that I haven't brought up yet, which is that this is used almost exclusively to describe relationships between a heterosexual female submissive and a heterosexual male dom, and that to some degree this relies on heteronormativity around sex in order to be a thing. That by default, in a heterosexual sex experience, the male orgasm is the focus, and that when by some miracle the female orgasm is part of the equation, when female pleasure is the focus, that is so unique and so special that it has to have its own label in order to be called out, simply because it is so unusual. And I think that is a very interesting idea that is worth examining. I think there are lots of ways that heteronormativity comes out in many different ways in the larger BDSM community, and I would like to think about that one a little bit more. I haven't really formed any solid thoughts around that yet, if that's like totally true or not to me, but it was interesting, and I did want to at least tell you all about it in case it kind of got stuck in your head in a way that it did mine. So, all that being said, I think in the end here, how do I feel about the term pleasure dom? Not that my individual opinion really matters that much. If you want to use it, go ahead and use it. But for my own 2 cents, I do think that this term actually is fairly useful, especially when it comes to signaling a preference for sexual BDSM over non-sexual BDSM. I'm a little bit annoyed that people on TikTok appear to talk about this term like it's been around since 1978, even though it only got invented maybe 2 years ago. But that's the internet, that's TikTok. I can only be so mad about that, which is like barely at all, just sort of a sticking point for me there. But you know, honestly, if it is something that you think is useful, if it describes your BDSM activities in an accurate way, I think that is awesome. As always though, I do encourage looking into more about the BDSM community, learning about how we use particular terminology, learning about other types of BDSM outside of that particular bubble. Because my one big fear with this is that somebody would adopt this term, and because it solely focuses on such a narrow form of play, that person maybe would feel like they can't do anything else or risk losing the position of being a pleasure dom. And I never want that to happen. I want people, again, to know about the wonderful wide world of BDSM and all of the wonderful, amazing, different things that people can choose to do. And I think introspection is always a good thing to do, and I really think it's a good thing here if you are drawn to this term to examine maybe some of the underlying biases you have about how you think other people do BDSM, what you think a sadist is like, what you think a dom is like, what you think a default submissive is like, and how maybe that might contribute to your adopting the term pleasure dom. But of course, again, anyone can use this term if they so choose. I think if it's a positive thing for you and it contributes to your BDSM experience or navigating the community in a positive way, that is great. That is awesome. That is what I hope terms like this do. Just, you know, don't rely on stereotypes to form your identity. That is really what I want to encourage here, I think, more than anything. And yeah, this was a really unexpected process of discovery for me when I was looking into this term. I found some things that I thought I was going to find. I found some things that were pretty surprising. And I would love to know what you all think about this in a comment down below. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? What do you think about this term? Do you use it for yourself? I tried really hard in this to make it clear that I am like not against using the term pleasure dom. I do think there are some interesting critiques and ideas that are worth exploring around it. But again, I just want to say one final time that if pleasure dom is something that speaks to you, that is awesome and amazing, and I am glad you have found a label that works to describe your kink. Now, if you want to make sure to not miss out on any other videos from me, and you have not already, please do subscribe, because I make videos twice a week about all sorts of kink and BDSM related content. And finally, if you want to support what I do, the best way you can do that is with Patreon. A link to that will be down below. If you do already support me over there, thank you so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you all next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.